Welcome to the Mutual Aid Podcast. I'm Mike Kinman. Mutual aid is a way of life that reminds us the greatest joy in our lives is being together in community. And when we are in community, we share with each other as anyone has need, and we get to listen and learn from each other. And that last part is the reason I've started this podcast. Over nearly 30 years of ordained ministry in the Episcopal Church, I have met countless brilliant, inspirational people who give me different perspectives, who challenge and move me. This podcast is about deep listening to those voices. Sometimes it will be about an issue or event happening in the world, and sometimes it will just be a one-off conversation with someone who has intrigued or moved me. And because Mutual Aid is all about community, please let me know if you have any suggestions of people or topics that would interest you. My email is mkinman@gmail.com, and you can always reach me there. The first few episodes are likely to be a little rough around the edges as I'm still learning how to do this. And the good news is that this first series I am doing on the Voting Rights Act is 4 interviews you are not going to want to miss. Each one was powerful, moved me, and made me think in different ways. So let's get on with today's guest. Inman, and welcome to Mutual Aid. And this is kind of a new experiment for me of doing a podcast off of the Substack I've had, and really doing what I hope to do a lot with that, which is to really have it be a platform to hear from some of the most amazing people that I've had the privilege of meeting in my time on this planet. And so when something like this month's final gutting of the Voting Rights Act happens, it's one of these things that just impacts all of us. And at the same time, it especially impacts those among us whose franchise it was specifically designed to protect. I've heard a lot of reactions to the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, many of them excellent, and many of them very practical. And one of the things I'm learning is that in times of crisis, it's important not only to react, but to reflect. To honor the feelings and deeper ruminations that happen, and to make space for the humanity of those who are most deeply impacted by traumatic events. And this is a traumatic event. And so when I was thinking about whose reflections I wanted not only to hear myself, but I wanted others to hear, Reverend Gayle Fisher-Stewart came to mind right away. And if you don't know Gayle, I'm going to give you a little introduction. She's a native of Washington. She spent about 20 years in the Metropolitan Police Department, eventually retiring as a captain. During and after her law enforcement career, she focused on issues of racism and inequity in policing and public institutions. She taught criminal justice at the university level and consulted with organizations, including the U.S. Department of Justice, I'm assuming at a very different age than today. She entered ordained ministry after studying at Wesley Theological Seminary, was ordained an Episcopal priest in 2015. She served parish ministry in Washington, D.C., including Calvary Episcopal Church, where she founded the Center for the Study of Faith in Justice. She is a prominent voice in conversations within and without the church about race policing and the church's responsibility in confronting white supremacy. She is an author. Her books include Preaching Black Lives Matter, Black and Episcopalian, The Struggle for Inclusion, and Church Hurt, Reparations for My Soul, Healing Racialized Trauma. And she has graciously agreed to share some of her thoughts with us today. And so, Gayle, it is just wonderful to reconnect with you, and thanks for coming on board.
It's good to see you. Good to see you in these weird times.
Well, let's start off by sort of going back in time to a different time. And I'm interested, what is your earliest memory of the Voting Rights Act? And is there a story or two you can share of how the Voting Rights Act and the benefits of it has impacted you?
Well, the thing about it, the Voting Rights Act, remember, I grew up in D.C., and so you didn't vote anyway. My parents couldn't vote until 60-something anyway in federal elections. And so, see, remember, we have a whole different story here in Washington.
Right, yeah.
Right. You didn't get to vote for
without
mayor.
representation.
Right. He didn't get to vote for mayor until the late 60s, early 70s. And so the Voting Rights Act, folks are going, okay, well, oh, let's try this, because every place else people could vote, but they were denied access to voting.
Mm,
And so that's the thing about the Voting Rights Act, is that no, since we became citizens, kind of, sort of this country, we've had the ability to vote. We just were prohibited from voting. So that's how I see. This is just
okay.
more of the same with voter suppression and trying to eliminate um, same day voting, eliminating polling places, mail in
Hmm.
ballots. It's more of the same.
Hmm.
It's just it's,
Now, you
it's just
said
more.
since we became citizens, kind of, sort of, in this country. Say more about that.
The 14th Amendment said that we were citizens, kind of, sorta,
Yeah.
right? Kind of, sorta. Because you're
Yeah.
not a full citizen unless you have the right to vote. So
Right.
we kind of sort of had the right to vote. We just couldn't get to the places, or they were, how many bubbles in a bar of soap, how many jelly beans in the jar, or can you read this portion of whatever state constitution it was and interpret it, when the person who was asking you to do it didn't even know how to spell constitution, but they were white and we were
Hmm.
black. And so this is kind
Hmm.
of like more of the same of having this country, what is was intended to be in the first
Hmm.
place, ruled by rich white men.
Right.
And so once you get over the shock of what happened, then you go like, this is this country.
Hmm.
Between Nathan McCall in his book, Make Me Want to Holler, and Marvin Gaye, Make Me Want to Holler, Throw Up Both My Hands, you go like, okay,
Right.
I've done that. So now let's try to figure out whether or not we even want to make this country what we have really drunk the Kool-Aid into believing it should be.
Hmm.
And how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, on one level, there's a whole section of the country that looks at supposedly the values that this country was founded on, and has this belief that we live into them. Then there's a whole other section of this country that believes we actually do aspire to those. But then I think there's a whole question of, do we really actually aspire to those, or do we just like to think of ourselves as people who aspire to those?
We
And
like to
it's like,
think of ourselves as people who aspire to those ideals of meritocracy and equality. And I hate
mhm,
that word, because what does equal with whom? Who sets the standard, right? So I'm supposed to be equal to whom or what? Um,
mhm,
but just being in a position where I am free to be all who God calls me to be, and other people don't put obstacles in my way. I'm not
mhm,
asking for anything extra. Don't want anything from you. It's just like,
mhm.
don't put obstacles in my way. And so we've had obstacles just placed in our way all along. And we have to ask, like, for what reason? Like, what is it
Mm,
about this brown skin that makes white people crazy?
mhm.
And no
Now,
one
you've
wants to
seen
answer
this.
that question,
Well, right.
right?
Well, so what
What
do you
is it
think? What
about
do you
this
think?
brown skin?
Yeah. Well, what do you think the answer is?
If you look at the history of this country and how this whiteness and blackness came about, I almost think that it's almost like a soul sickness,
Mm,
that if women are equal, and immigrants are equal, and black people are equal, and then what does that make me? Who am I? I don't stand out anymore. I'm not
right.
special anymore. So we have to keep putting up barriers to keep other people from becoming who they are, because then I'm just regular Joe Blow like everybody else, and I don't want to be regular Joe Blow. I mean, you think of the people who have money in this country, and if they didn't have money, who would they be?
Mm,
If they didn't have money, who would they be?
mhm. But that's also a theological question. That
Yeah, if
is
you want,
that
if you,
that it well, it can be. I mean, but shouldn't the church? I mean, that's actually because you're a historian too. And shouldn't the church be the ones who are saying, "Well, we'll tell you who you are. You are a beautiful child of God. You are infinitely important as who you are, and someone else's importance does not infringe on your importance." But that's not what the church has taught.
no, the churches don't because they want to maintain the institution. The institution is more important than Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Well, absolutely.
So we can't,
So like,
people can't preach that. They won't preach that. They're afraid to preach it. If they preach it, they may
mhm.
get, fired by the vestry because we have this weird system, and
So I've
there's,
heard.
ah, and there's minimal, little support from bishops, who
Mm-hmm.
will tell you we don't have any power. Then I'm going like, then why do we have you if you have no
Mm-hmm.
power? you know so you have
Yep.
all those questions that we preach. We talk a good word, but we don't put it in practice. The
Mm-hmm.
number of people who haven't heard any of this from the pulpit because it's not an lectionary, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
an lectionary. I don't preach it, as opposed to sometimes we just need to throw away the lectionary and preach what people need to hear, even if it's uncomfortable. And so we have to figure out exactly what is the church about, because I will tell people I don't love the church because the church does not love me. I love Jesus, but I don't love the church because the church, if I love the church, that's like me loving my abuser. And that makes no sense at all, to love your
Mm-hmm.
abuser. But there are people who are more in love with the church. They'll get into discussions and arguments over, the manual actions of the priest at the Eucharist, as opposed to how many people did you step over who are homeless to get into the church?
Mm-hmm.
That's not important. And so we have to figure out, what the church is, what the church is about. And I think it was in Black and Episcopalian, that book, I said,
Mm-hmm.
if I were ever presiding bishop, but that would last all of 15 minutes, um, because I'd say, look, we're going to be like Jesus. And if you don't want to be like Jesus, you can find other denominations or no denominations to belong to. And if we end up with only 12 actual disciples, um, Jesus had difficult with the 12,
That's right.
right? Jesus had difficult
Yeah.
with the 12. And so, as long as we want to maintain the institution, we're not going to speak out because, of course, this denomination is 90% white. And I tell folks, if you don't think we got some MAGA in these pews and in these pulpits,
Mm-hmm.
I've got a couple of bridges I'd like to sell you. But
Mm-hmm.
because they have money and they have control, we don't want to, upset them. As opposed to, no, we're going to upset you. Jesus upset people. That's what got him lynched.
Mm-hmm.
You all don't want to be lynched, so you're not going to upset people.
So you brought that statistic of the Episcopal Church being 90% white,
Yes.
which I think that's a conservative estimate.
Yes.
Um, and so let's say at least 90% white. And so much, of when we talk about the Voting Rights Act, it's about representation.
Yes.
And it's about being able to have the numbers consolidated enough to be able to not just make a change, but to impact the culture, to impact the nature of an institution. And one of my experiences of the church is that it's when we think about justice, a lot of times we think about justice as going outward, like we're the people preaching justice out there, but it's an entirely different matter to hold the mirror up to ourselves. And so if the Voting Rights Act and the gutting of it is creating a crisis of representation in our country, what is the state of representation in the church?
Come on now. We had the first, probably only for a while, black presiding bishop. I mean, we
Oh,
had
so it's
our
all
turn.
it's all fine.
We've had our time in
Right.
in the sunlight, in the
Mm-hmm.
daylight, you know. We had been there, and we can
Mm-hmm.
look at the number of black female and gay bishops that we have? I mean, isn't that enough? Do you want all of the bishops to be?
Hmm.
So we have representation. It just means it just is like, what does that representation look like? Because even when we look at the country, okay, so we are a republic. We are a
Hmm.
republic. That means that everybody is represented. And
Hmm.
we have a democratic system of governing. That means that the majority wins. But the problem with the Voting Rights Act, we can't even get representation in Congress. Now,
Hmm.
if we have representation in Congress and we lose because it's a democracy, you say, okay, that's the way the system is set up, right?
Hmm.
That's the way it's set up.
Right.
But what you're saying is that we won't even have representation
Right.
in Congress to even say, like, we know we're going to lose on this legislation. We know this bill is going to fail, but at least we're going to put it on the floor.
Hmm.
And that's what's gutted.
Yeah.
That's what's gutted. We won't even have a voice in the making
Right.
of the laws.
Wow. And the ability to in that on that stage to dissent
To
and to
dissent.
have your dissent be a part of the record.
Right, because we won't be there.
Won't do that.
And there's this assumption, well, you really don't have to be there because if we have representatives, they will represent you. And we're going like, no, that's not how it works in this country. And sometimes it doesn't even work well when you have people who look like you.
Yeah.
Right? So we can't assume, but that is that whole mindset that, okay, it's not about color, it's not about race, it's all fair, it's a level play. And so anybody there, they can represent you. But no, you not really, because you number one, you don't even know me.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even know me. So how are you going to represent me?
Mm-hmm. I haven't even thought about this in terms of you being from Washington. And again, like the license plates, at least one point literally said taxation without representation, which I
Oh,
just thought was just the most amazing shade to put on a license plate. Um,
still.
and and I'm wondering, is there being a Washingtonian, do you have a different and specific view on disenfranchisement?
Well, I mean, I was born and raised in DC, but I do live in Maryland, so I kind of
Right. See,
straddle.
right. Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But you do. You have, taxation without representation still. I mean,
Hmm.
DC is a colony. It's run by Congress.
Hmm.
We may have a mayor, but the mayor has to answer to Congress, right?
Hmm.
So it's the last colony in this
Hmm.
country.
Well, I guess Puerto Rico, and yeah, within this country. I mean, yeah, but it's yeah,
Right,
it's very much so.
right.
So, um, I, I'm interested in. I was listening to Otis Moss, the
Ah,
third preach. I love
yes.
Otis.
I love him.
And he opened his remarks by saying sometimes something happens that make you want to speak in other tones. And and it just is, and his have you seen his? Usually does 5 minutes. He did 10 minutes
His
on the
five
Voting
minutes.
Rights Act.
His five
Yeah,
minutes,
he
yes.
did. Yeah, but he did 10 minutes on the Voting Rights Act. He did,
Right.
and and it was beautiful, and so much of it because he led us through the history and he led us through all that, but you could tell that he was speaking as someone whose heart was deeply grieved, and there's all sorts of different reactions to this, and I'm just sort of wondering if your heart could talk or sing or scream or whatever, um, what came from your heart when you heard the latest Supreme Court decision, and what has continued to come from your heart in the days since?
Who's going to listen to this? Because
I don't know.
one of my favorite
A
ones has said,
variety
fuck,
of people.
just fuck it.
That's great. Fuck it.
You
Great.
know, like, I don't know if I should be angry or I should be disappointed. And I
Mm,
couldn't decide which one. Like, the way this country is. I
yeah.
have when all of this stuff started coming out with Trump and uh I majored in government and politics, and stuff wasn't making sense
Hmm.
to me. So I had to question, did I skip those classes? Not take the right classes, fell asleep in class, and I actually had to go back and study again because I said something is not making sense.
Hmm.
And that's when I actually started going back, researching the beginnings of this country after, after 1776, and then with the coming of the Constitution, which came, after 1776, because you had really had 13 states who were acting independently but drawn together by the Articles of Confederation. And the reason they weren't working because you had the Revolutionary War, you had the war, right? Wars cost money. People have to pay for those wars. And so after it was all over, the countries and the rich folks wanted their money back. So how do you do that? You tax the regular people. And so the folks in the states were getting a little beside themselves. And so George Washington received a letter from one of his officers and said, we need you to come back into the fray because these people are upsetting us. Because as under the Articles of Federation, they could not tamp down public dissent. They could go to war, they could do money. There was one more, but they couldn't stop the people from protesting. And so you had
Yeah.
Shays' Rebellion in
Yeah.
Massachusetts, right? Where
Right.
folks,
Right.
the farmers were coming because they were losing their farms based on taxes to pay
Hmm.
for this war. And so they came together. And if you go to the Library of Congress and read James Madison's notes, because they collected whatever notes people took while they were meeting in Philadelphia. Um, but he went home and from memory rewrote what happened in those sessions. And one thing that was said, and I know folks love Alexander Hamilton because of the play, right?
Right.
But he was one of the people who said, too much democracy is bad for this country because people will
Mm.
not want to invest in it.
Oh, there you go.
Too
Yep.
much democracy is bad for this country. Why? Because the regular folks will go like, no, we don't want to do this. We're not
Hmm.
concerned with you all making hand over fist. And so when
Hmm.
you read those documents, you go like, okay, it was never set up to be what we think it should be. Never. It was supposed to be ruled by rich, propertied, white men.
And, mhm.
And so it's taken 250 years to get back to that.
Hmm.
And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, what do we do? Do we just accept it?
Mm.
Or do we do as they did? Because, it says whenever a government doesn't do what it's supposed to do, you have the right, you have the
Right.
obligation to start over all over
Right.
again. And so do we do that? And what is it that we want to do? Because, you and I keep this book with me,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yep. Oh, Serge's book. Great.
Serge's book.
Blueprint for
And,
Revolution. Yes.
and one thing he said in the book says that you need a goal.
Hmm.
You need a goal. We
Hmm.
don't have a goal right now. The goal is not to get rid of Trump. That might be an objective, a
Right.
task, but we don't have a goal, a stated goal that everybody, regardless
Hmm.
of class, regardless of race, regardless of gender, can coalesce around and say, we like this goal. Now, what do we need to do to achieve this
Hmm.
particular goal? One might be, okay, we need to reinstate the Voting Rights Act. Okay, that's fine.
Right.
However, we had a Voting Rights Act, and how many people did not vote?
Right.
Right?
And what options were they given when they did?
And what options were they given? And so for some people, it might be, we need everybody to do something. And so Mike, I know your plate is full. Your plate is full, but I know you know two people who did not vote.
Right.
All we
That's
want you
right.
to do is talk to those two people this time. And then you don't have to do anything else
Right.
because we know you can't handle any more than that. Right? And so
Yeah.
we have to figure out what the goal is. And if
Mm.
we want to involve the church, what that goal will be for the church, I'm not sure because the
Mm.
church is risk averse. It is
Yeah.
not going to risk the institution,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to decide what the goal is beyond getting rid of Trump. Because I said, you'd have to take out the whole line of secession and then
Right.
some.
Right.
Right? There are just too many people propping him up. He's really the puppet. There are too many hands manipulating him.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we want to have a country where people are free to be who God has called them to be
Mm-hmm.
and are able to share in God's bounty,
Mm-hmm.
what do we need to do that?
Mm.
What do we need to do that? How do we make that a reality?
Mm. God, we could go off in so many different directions from this. This is great. What just chopped into my mind is I don't know if you know Rabbi Sharon Brous.
Mm,
I, yeah, Sharon's wonderful, and I was talking with her once, and she pulled out. She actually preached a great sermon on this as a piece of midrash. And I'm going to get this wrong, but the essence of it is this idea that you can't repair a house that is built at the foundation from rotten timber. Um, and so the issue that comes up to me as you talk about this, as we have this conversation, is what is this about taking the existing system and saying, okay, can we continue to evolve it and fix it? Right now, it feels like the goal is let's get back to the way things were, which to me that's not a goal.
no, no,
Um, but is this? And you and I have had conversations before about what the word reform and reformation means.
right.
Does it mean trying to fix the house that's with the rotten timber, or does it mean dismantling it and building something new? And so, I mean, as we think in those terms, um, what do you think?
We need to break that word down. You and I have talked about it. Okay, reform. Okay, no, we
Right.
need to reform.
Reform.
We need to reform, which means we take it down to the studs. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you live in a house for a while and you have tweaked it, you have remodeled, you have fixed this. We come in one day and say, this is not working anymore. We need to take it down to the studs. And if the studs are good, we'll use the studs and we will rebuild. If the studs are no good, we just knock it all down.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to recognize that it was built on sinking sand in the first place. And for me, it's like putting new icing on a stale cake. Eventually, that icing is going to go bad.
That's right.
It's going to look pretty on the outside for a little while,
Mm-hmm.
but don't cut into that cake because the
Mm-hmm.
cake is bad. And so, what would that take? Would it be done in our generation? I don't know. But at some point, we have to say we're at least going to make a stab at it because there are generations coming after us. And do we
Mm-hmm.
want them to go through the same thing? I'm looking at my grandnieces and nephews, and they will have fewer rights than I have. I have more rights than my parents.
Mm-hmm.
They will have fewer rights than I have. And something is wrong with that. Something is wrong with it. I
Yeah.
look at my niece. Okay, so she could vote at 18. She's 33. So how many years has she been a full citizen of her
Mm-hmm.
33 years?
Right. Right.
Right? Because if you don't have representation, if you don't have a say, even though your say may not go anywhere, you're not a full
Mm-hmm.
citizen. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, in this country, black people were never meant to be full citizens. And if you listen to
Mm-mm.
some of the ministers, Hegseth's minister, they want to repeal the 19th Amendment. Women should have no vote. RFK Jr. would say, people are unbabied or some stupid thing, you
Right.
know, unbabied, like.
Right. Yeah.
So, how many categories of people do you dismiss and get rid of before all you left are the rich, white,
Mm.
moneyed men?
Mm.
And they are in charge of everything, to include the church, because then they will finance the church, however the
Yeah.
church is.
Mhm. Mhm. You talked before about having a goal, and you've done a lot of work in it's a project 2024 or 2025. I know it's whatever it is. We're in 2026 right now, but that was a plan, and they had goals, and they are working the plan.
Oh, they're working a plan.
They're working the plan, and so what does that look like? I mean, this is one of the issues I have with the language of resistance, because the language of resistance is just saying not this, but it's not saying what instead. And so what would if we were to have a truly gospel based, a truly Jesus based project, insert year here, what would that look like?
I always say, can you imagine how different this country would be if the church was truly like Jesus?
Yeah, sit with that.
If the church was truly like Jesus, that we're going to call out everything that does not look like Jesus. And we're going to call it out from the pulpit, because people, unless it comes from the pulpit, people don't really buy it. You can have
Mm-hmm.
breakfast forums, you can have Sunday
Right.
school, but unless it's preached from the pulpit, folks don't take it seriously. And so suppose we said, okay, well, for example, the Episcopal Church, we're going to have a year of, we're going to preach truly Jesus.
Mm.
Throw away the
Mm.
lectionary. We're going to preach truly Jesus. If we see something happening, like what would Jesus have done with this? And we're going to preach. We're going to use a year to start dismantling, number one, the church.
Mm-hmm.
Can't dismantle society first. You got to dismantle the
Right.
church. And we're going to use a year, and we're going to get this church to look like Jesus. And then
Mm.
we can talk to the people outside the church,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that takes courage, again, risk. And the church is risk averse, because just like democracy was bad for capitalism, Jesus is bad for capitalism.
Jesus is so bad for
So
capitalism.
bad
That's
for
right. So
capitalism.
bad.
And the church is all up in capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's got a capital campaign. What is that? You're raising money for what? Mission or the roof?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, how
Mm-hmm.
many churches are sitting on endowments for a
Right.
rainy day? And we go like, rainy day has
Look
passed.
out the window.
Right.
Yep.
It's a tsunami. What are you saving it for? And how we could really make a difference in this world and people's lives if we stopped hoarding, stop being like the world. Because you tell me why someone needs hundreds of billions of dollars, you'll never be able to spend. So what is the purpose other than
Uh,
that means I'm somebody?
right.
That means I'm
Right.
somebody. And so to have
Yeah.
those conversations, and to have the leaders of the church say, this is what we're going to do. And if it offends you, if you don't like it, you can go someplace else. There are plenty of
Mm-hmm.
places. Go
Yep.
start your
Plenty.
own church if you want to,
That's right.
you know? But we love the institution as opposed to loving Jesus. We say we love Jesus, but we don't. We like to worship Jesus. We don't want to follow
Mm.
him because he takes us to the cross,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't want to get that. I remember writing a paper that cross is heavier than you think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's this amazing way that if we carry that cross together, I
Yeah.
mean, that's where Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." Is when we find community in following Jesus, not as an individual act, but we follow Jesus together. It is light. It is full of joy. It is amazing how liberating it is.
It is, and it gets to the point where um, Bell Hooks
Mm,
said that, and I tell folks that at some point in your life, you need to assess everything you've been taught,
yeah.
even by the church, because as Bell Hooks says, all education is political. It has an agenda,
Hmm.
even in the church. So have we been taught by the church to also be risk averse? You come in
Hmm.
on Sunday, you worship Jesus, but we don't really teach you how to follow Jesus and what
Yeah.
that looks like. We talk about
Mm,
discipleship, but we don't do discipleship. We do charity.
yeah.
And charity is about us. How
Hmm.
many people we fed? How many people came into the church on a cold night? We make people dependent on us as opposed to using our resources so that they don't need us anymore.
Hmm.
They don't need us anymore,
Hmm.
right? And so we need to rethink what we've been taught about the church. And I say, we every Sunday we say we profess. Our profession of faith is a Nicene Creed, right? It's our statement of faith. There's
Yeah.
nothing in there about Jesus's mission.
It's a comma. Yeah.
There's nothing in there. So if you
Yeah.
start talking about Jesus, well, this is what we say we're about.
Right.
I believe, I believe, I believe. It doesn't say anything about doing.
Right. Right.
So how do we tear that down so that we can reform it into what we
Mm,
need to do for this world? Or else we just say, fuck it. This is the way the world is, and there are going to be some good days, there are going to be some bad days, but as long as it doesn't come and negatively affect me and mine,
right.
I don't care.
Yeah. You said something to me last year when we were having a conversation because I was looking for sort of wisdom about what to do with my life. And you said one of the most impactful things I think anyone's ever said to me, which is you said, Mike, your ability to follow Jesus will always be inversely proportional to your need for a steady paycheck. And it was just and what that wisdom did is made me realize, okay, um, if I'm going to follow Jesus, then the first thing I get to do, and it's not I have to do, I get to do, is I get to downsize my lifestyle. Um, so that that I'm not worried about, oh, if I say this, what's the financial impact going to be? If I stand with this person, what's the financial impact going to be? I'm not
Right,
there yet, but I'm working on it. And I think, it's got me reading like the Acts of the Apostles in a different way. And it's like, oh, this is why everyone held everything in common and gave to each as they have need,
right.
because we were not, and that was like, I don't know. Did you ever know there was a church in D.C. called the Potter's House, Gordon Cosby?
Yes,
Church, the
yes.
pot. Yeah. And like when you joined the Potter's House, you had to tithe. You had to give 10% of your income to the church. It was mandatory.
Right,
And
right.
if you couldn't pay your rent, the church would pay your rent. If your car broke down, you couldn't get to work. And it's like, wow, that's actually church.
Yes,
Because what we're saying is, things like, insurance is $1 trillion more industry in this country. It's a failure of community.
right,
Because in a real community, we wouldn't need an insurance company. We would help each other. We'd be like, oh, I'm a doctor. I can help you. Oh, I can do this. And
right,
that's when I think about, if, is this, do we keep tweaking this system, or, I've been reading a lot of Octavia Butler or rereading Octavia
mm,
Butler recently. And,
right.
when she wrote things like Parable of the Sower in the 90s, people say, well, how did you get your vision of what happened in the 2020s? She said, well, I just fast forwarded 30 years with the problems of today as if we did nothing about them. And she
Right.
was pretty close.
She's
But
pretty
what she
close.
found was it's a story of many things, but part of it is it's that the coin of the realm is loving relationship in local community.
Right.
And how can we do that?
How can we do that?
Which that sort of sounds like that's what the church should be.
Oh, but that's socialism, isn't it?
perhaps, yeah. So that's good. That's like it's like my son is in Barcelona right now. He's in Spain,
Mm,
and he pays like €50 a month for access to national health care.
yeah,
And I'm just
yeah.
like, it's like, anyway, we could, oh my God, I could talk to you for hours. We could do this forever. I wanted to sort of say, it's like you have actually felt disenfranchisement on many levels, as you've said, not just in Washington, as a black woman in America and in the church. Um, I check all the boxes of franchisement. And so, like straight, white, educated, etc., cisgender American male. If you could tell people like me who have never felt disenfranchisement, one or two things, what would you tell us?
Give up being white. I
Okay,
don't
tell
even
me
need
how.
two things.
Okay, no,
I would get
no, tell me how I do that.
just one thing. Give
Because
up
you're not
being
talking
white.
about going to the tanning booth.
No, I'm not talking. But when you again, when you study the history of this country, the terms
Yeah.
white and black were created to divide people. I mean, if you
Mm-hmm.
look in the mirror, you are not white. You're not white.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
was
Okay.
created in the colonies to separate the 2% at that time
Mm-hmm.
from the indentured Europeans and the enslaved Africans because they were
Mm-hmm.
together. I mean, that's why you had
Mm-hmm.
Bacon's Rebellion. They go like, we're doing all the
Right.
work and you all are getting all the money. And so
Right.
they convinced the Europeans, the rich Europeans convinced the indentured Europeans, but you're not black. You only have to do this
Mm.
for 7 years. They're going to have to
Right.
do it for the rest of their life. And, maybe one day you can be like us. And they drank
Mm.
the Kool-Aid. So the thing is to give up being white. And folks said, well, then what am I? Well, how about human?
Yeah. Yeah.
How about,
So really,
how
you're
about
going to
human?
liberate yourself from whiteness.
That's liberate yourself from whiteness, from a term that was
Yeah.
given to you to
Mm.
divide. And then somebody would come, but you're black. And I say, yeah, but I chose to be black. Well, what do you mean? I said, because on my birth certificate, it's a C for colored. And then I was Negro. And then I
Yeah.
was Afro-American. And then I was African-American. I just kind of stuck with black because, again, the term black was a term to
Mm.
disrespect. Because when I was coming up, if you call somebody black, you were going to get a beat down. And white
Mm.
people used it to deny our humanity. So during the 60s, we took it back. Like, you may call me black, but you will never ever hurt me with it again.
Mm.
So there's a difference between calling yourself black and calling yourself white. We said, no, you will never use this word again to hurt me. And in some ways, with young people using the word nigger, right? Oh, how can you use that word? They're saying you will never ever hurt me with this word again because that word also was created by white people. So
Mm.
you can call me that, but you won't hurt me with it.
Mm.
Right? And so taking power back. We can call ourselves American as long as we understand what that term is, but how about human? How about human? We're human. We just got different shades. But then who's in power if we're all
Mm.
human? Okay? That whole power
Mm.
thing comes back.
Mm.
Because it's interesting. I don't know if you watch Bridgerton, right? Do you watch?
No, I haven't seen
Okay,
Bridget.
so
No.
so Bridgerton is England in the 1700s with
Yeah.
the first black queen, okay, Queen Charlotte, and so you
Mm-hmm.
have this caste system this in society, but you have the blacks who have been able to come into the ton because of Queen Charlotte. And I said, and I've been watching this on its fourth season now, and then this last season it dawned on me. I said, my God, the black people are treating everybody else like they were treated, but now they
Mm-hmm.
are part of the aristocracy. But they have turned
Mm.
around and are treating people as they were treated.
Mm.
because that's what
Mm,
that power does. I'm one of them.
mhm.
Therefore, I must treat you as I was treated. And so we have to figure out, how do we just be human without denigrating people,
Yeah, how do we break
without
that
looking
cycle?
down.
Do you know Resma Menachem in his
Yeah.
book My Grandmother's Hands? Yeah, he talks about that. He talks about, again, those sort of indentured servants that you speak of in Bacon's Rebellion, ended up revisiting the trauma that was visited on them, on
Yeah.
Black and Indigenous people in this country, and it just continues the cycle of just
It
doing
does.
violence to ourselves and each other.
Right.
And
The
so, and
trauma.
again, it's sort of like, wow, that's something the gospel really could, you know, if we had a church that, I mean, we sort of have an app for that, for breaking that cycle,
Right.
and for reconciliation and healing, or conciliation, as you would say, and healing,
Yeah.
is like, how do we come together and heal from the trauma instead of continuing to revisit it generation upon generation upon generation?
That's true. And again, it begins with the church, because you have your well-resourced churches who all get together, once a
Mm,
year. And I don't, you know,
right.
because I'm
Yeah.
not from a well-resourced church, I don't go,
That, that's
you
right.
know? So we have a caste and a class system within the church too.
Amy Butler, who used to be the pastor at Riverside Church, started a nonprofit called Invested Faith.
Mm,
And what she discovered is that faith communities in this country, and I forget how many trillions of dollars in income and assets
oh
exist in
yeah.
faith communities, but and it was just this. It really, she started this with a question of what would happen if we took all that money and used it. I'm not even just here for the gospel, because this is all faith, but used it for the loving, just purposes that bind most faiths together at their core.
Mm-hmm.
What would happen if we would do that?
Mm-hmm.
And instead, she may have used this, or someone else used this idea. It's like, we're, in this country, we spend something like $500 billion on end of life care, medical care, life prolonging care in the last 6 months of life, and no one gets
Right.
better.
Right.
And that's what the church is doing with our
Yes.
resources. We're perpetuating a dying institution, instead of saying, in the same way that families get bankrupted by medical debt and by medical bills in the last 6 months of life, could we use that for a legacy of gospel justice?
Yeah.
And so Amy's asking a really good question, about that, because the church ain't poor.
The church is not poor. The Christian church, I mean, just the Christian church, the
Yeah,
money that comes in from people's pockets, not
right,
grants or anything, is
right.
is greater than the national budget,
Wow,
the federal
wow.
budget. It is greater than the federal, and that's people giving,
Yeah,
not all the
yeah.
other sources. But and if you think about what you could do with
Oh my
that
gosh.
money, yeah.
Oh yeah.
And
That's that's
why
amazing.
won't we do it? Why won't we do it?
Yeah. So maybe an answer is start by dreaming that question, and then getting people together and saying, how do we incarnate? There's a good faith word. How do we
Nope.
incarnate
How do we
this
incarnate?
vision?
Yeah,
Yeah.
how can we be more like Jesus?
Can we more like
You
Jesus? Let's just put
know?
it that way.
How can we be more like Jesus? I
Can we
mean,
be more like Jesus?
that's what we're supposed to be, but
Mm,
Jesus is really over in the corner,
mm,
going like,
mm.
I'm over here, like, no, you're not dressed right. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we think about Jesus and the second coming, he's coming back, and we've been programmed again
Hmm.
about how this is supposed to look when Jesus comes back, right?
Right, right.
Supposed to be trumpets and da 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 da. I said, Jesus could actually be here, but he's in a hoodie.
Hmm.
So we're not
Hmm.
seeing him because he doesn't look like we're supposed to see him. He's walking around going like, no, these people are not ready. I'm not going to announce anything.
Hmm.
But Jesus could already be here. Just
Yeah.
just taking stock and going like, they're not ready. And
Yeah.
if I announce that I'm here, they'll probably lynch me all over again.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Anything else you want to close with?
We need a goal.
Okay.
We need a goal. So either we're going to make this country into what we have been taught it should be,
Mm-hmm.
or we're just going to let it die because all empires eventually die.
Amen. Well, here's to
Amen.
having a goal. Let's dream it
Here's
and
to having a
let's
goal.
incarnate
Let's
it and
dream
let's
it.
do it together.
Let's dream
Okay,
big.
Gayle, let's dream big. Thank you very much. And
Thank
just
you. Thank you.
let's just keep on keeping on. Thanks a lot.
Blessings.